Welcome to a new episode of Cali Claptrap, Integral Conversations. Today's guest is Jorge Ferrer. Welcome to the show, Jorge.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, Matt. Thanks for the invitation.
Awesome. Well, it's an honor to have you. Jorge is a psychologist and former professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies. He is the author of Revisioning Transpersonal Theory, a participatory vision of spirituality and participation in the mystery. His newest book is Love and Freedom, Transcending Monogamy and Polyamory. Before discussing your new book, Jorge, I was hoping to get a little bit about your background, about what religion did you grow up in, and just basically how did you eventually become a transpersonal researcher?
Thank you so much. I appreciate the question, Matt. I was born in Barcelona, Spain, so the religion I was raised obviously was Catholic Christianity. And I actually went through a Catholic school, Hermanos Maristas, a brotherhood of devoted to more the Virgin Mary, not God the Father, and they were like excellent educators. And I mentioned this also. I think it's important because in a way like that kind of like early devotion to the Virgin Mary versus God the Father, I think that it kind of influenced in some ways, in some theses about my participatory approach in transpersonal psychology that many people have seen as a more feminine approach to spirituality that other models that they were kind of prevalent in that time. So that was my upbringing, and of course, after that, I went through many different practices. I spent like almost 15 years in Buddhism, Zen, and Vipassana in particular. And also something very influential was the practice of entheogenic shamanism. I'm a San Pedrista. I offer San Pedro retreats in the lineage of Ruben Orellana and Victoria Hughes of the Circuit Valley of Peru. And of course, a plethora of psychotherapies, transformative works, and I've been very informed by many mystical traditions that I feel very close to my heart. And insofar as how I became a transpersonal scholar, let me try to make this short, as short as possible, because I know you have many questions. What I can say here is is that from early childhood, I have some kind of like altered state of consciousness. When I was in school, I would get into this kind of trance state. I was like 9 or 8 years old, or 10 years old, and it was a place of like the world would disappear around me. I was like pure white light and peace and joy. And the teacher or some of my peers would wake me up, would call me, and then I would break up crying. Things became, after 2, 3, or 4 times of this, the professors got concerned. Had like an epileptic seizures, so they took me to the psychiatrist and psychologist. I was completely healthy. So that kind of awakened that interest into different states of consciousness. Because only later in my Buddhist practice, I could recognize that those states were very similar to what in the early Buddhist traditions called the jhanas, states of absorption, and then in a pre-adolescent, also I started having out-of-body experiences, experimenting my consciousness out of my body. They were very scary for me at first. Later, I learned through the years to navigate them. So those kind of states of consciousness, and then my awareness of my own kind of neurotic blockages and neurotic tendencies in my young adulthood pulled me to study psychology. And my search to study psychology I was searching for healing. I was searching for understanding of those states I had experienced that I found it fascinating, and I couldn't understand them. And of course, mainstream psychology in Barcelona in the late 80s, even now, was completely cognitive, behavioral, neuroscientific. And so it was more self-searching in the library, like reading like depth psychology and Freud and Jung. Eric Fromm was for me like a bridge. Eric Fromm and psychoanalysis and Zen Buddhism, that book. I came out of Zen Buddhism, I started practicing Zen, and then I came out with transpersonal psychology in the library. And for many years, for me, was like a dream to go to California to study with all the transpersonal psychologists I was reading in Barcelona. And after
Mm-hmm.
many years, I got a fellowship from a cultural foundation in Spain that allowed me to travel to California, to the California Institute of Integral Studies. And at this very same year I arrived, 1993, was the year that Stanislav Grof and Richard Turner came to the school to teach. And
Wow.
that was very synchronistic because in a way, Stan, Rick, and I kind of shape or form parts of similar lineage of transpersonal scholars. Rick became my main mentor in California, and of course I studied with Stan as well. This is a short story that is more, but I know you have many other questions. If I'm speaking too fast, let me know, because I know my accent is a bit thick. And when I moved back to Barcelona 4 years ago, and it got thicker, so please, I can speak slower if you want me to.
No, you're fine. Yeah, you're right. I have a lot of questions and we have a little bit of time, so I want to hear all your answers.
Great.
Awesome. So participatory is an alternative to neo-perennialism. I was hoping you could talk to our listeners, just briefly summarize how this shift in thinking altered the transpersonal community.
Thank you. Well, I think it did several things from what I have seen retrospectively and what I have learned from other scholars speaking about my work and more historically. And I believe that one of the things that it did is to kind of like diversify the field, to legitimize a greater number of spiritual perspectives as valid per se in their own sake, without kind of establishing hierarchies between them according to kind of ideological doctrines or ontological ultimates, as some of the prevalent models, including Ken Wilber, of course, but also Stanislav Grof and many others were doing. So in a way, these models were kind of like arranging different spiritualities, different traditions, according to a paradigmatic sequence. So that also the claim was that there was kind of like a representative of a spiritual evolution for all humankind. The problem with these hierarchies I came to see, as well as many other people also saw, is that it was creating like this kind of like rankings, right? So like non-dual traditions were normally placed in the top, then theistic traditions a bit down, then shamanic and earth-based spiritualities were even down. And of course, that's kind of like, it felt to me like really like, it didn't really make much sense, for me. If the approach is an approach to liberation, if the approach to freedom, spiritual freedom, for me the important is not if someone is practicing non-dual meditation or shamanism or conscious parenting or hugging trees, but the impact. What's the transformative effect on the practice on different people? And that on the one hand. On the other hand, also, I think it had an impact on psychotherapeutic practice, because when I arrived to California, many transpersonal psychotherapists had internalized those models. Mm-hmm. And I talked, for example, with someone like a whole very dear to my heart and passed away a few years ago, like Frances Vaughan, for example, and a few other transpersonal psychotherapists who I would get the sense that when they would see a clients, they would try to see in what level of spiritual evolution were these clients according to those models. And in a way, kind of in subtle or not so subtle ways, they were trying to push people in those directions in that scale of spiritual evolution. But by doing so, the problem is that they were kind of like hindering the organic unique spiritual individuation of each particular person, and that for me had like also very practical consequences. So the models were not only problematic on a conceptual level, they also had problematic practical consequences. There is much more, but I know you have questions.
No, that's
you can always ask me. You can always ask me if you want me to elaborate further in any of this.
Yeah, of course, and hopefully we'll intertwine all these things as we go along. So one of my next questions, to kind of skip around, was how, number one, have you ever talked to Ken Wilber? Because I know there's a disagreement going on, but as a reader, kind of seeing and being so interested in both models, and obviously I think he had some claims where he assigned your sort of vision as a green meme, but eventually he came around to it. I was wondering, have you two ever conversed, and is it more of a friendly disagreement, or are you guys sort of on separate ends and not that?
Well, I can share with you my side of the story, and sure he can share his own. Probably the truth is somewhere in the middle, as usual in these cases, with most conflicts or most disagreements. But my side of the story, like I was in contact with Ken Wilber as I was a student at CIS. I was sending him my writings. I was like, I just came to California. I was very excited to contact with transpersonal scholars. He was very supportive of my writings, even though sometimes like I felt that, I don't know, like I was feeling like, wow, he's, I didn't want to think that way, but I felt that a couple of times I felt like he was taking some of the things I had sent to him in his writings, but it wasn't a big deal. It's like, well, he's such a brilliant scholar. I'm sure he was thinking along the same lines. We're kind of like, pushing the envelope in similar ways, for example, with an active paradigm of cognition applied to spiritual matters and so forth, So we had this friendly dialogue for some time. He was very supportive until I published one paper that was kind of more critical of his perspective. And that was the end. My sense, I have a great respect for Ken and his work. And in a way, like I could see parts of my work as being born thanks to him in the same way, in the way that was kind of like by counter distinction from things that they didn't sit with me well about his model, that they developed some of my ideas. So I have a big depth of gratitude to him. And at the same time, I felt that either there was like this kind of like, either you are with me and me at my school and you endorse my thinking, or you suddenly you are kind of against me. And that was like not the logical, collegial, way of relating to other scholars and different ideas I was used to as a scholar in Spain. I was at the university in Spain, and that kind of like took me. It's like, wow, is this really happening? And later, of course, Alan, he tried to censor my work in different ways more actively. That was really painful to see, and different people like the editor of the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology, Kaisa Pohaga at that time, and Michael Lerner, editor of Tikkun, friends of mine. They told me the stories. He was threatening to them. If you publish his papers, I will never publish again. I mean, it was pretty bad. So I think for some time there was a more of a non-friendly relationship between us. I have to say, like, we stopped having contact and dialogue with each other for many, many years. And my sense that now it's much more friendly and relaxed. In the sense, I was invited 3 years ago to an integral European conference, and I was in a panel with Roger Wells, who's a good friend of mine, and also Ben Seganti and Robert McNamara. And basically, it was called the Integral Transpersonal Dialogue, the panel. And the attempt was to heal the perspectives, to heal the rift. I think we did a great job. And most people in the audience were integral scholars, mostly supportive of Ken Wilber. They were very happy with my participation. So I think there was a great healing that happened there, even though Ken and I, we never talked again after all that.
Yeah, well, thank you. Appreciate it. That does lead me to sort of a question about like stage theory, how you define integral, and can sort of the two models exist? And so what I'm thinking here, and you tell me if this is kind of off base, but can that hierarchical ranking still sort of exist, maybe like in the mental sort of way of perspective, whereas maybe the participatory is more of sort of an integral way of sort of viewing things?
Okay. That's a good question. It needs a lot of qualification because on the one hand, I'm not against stage models in general. I very much accept many stage models of like, Western cognitive moral development, even though I think cross-cultural critique is very important here, and as well as gender critique and other minorities. But when we move to the spiritual territory, when we move to spiritual growth, also here an important distinction. One thing is the stage models that take place within a single tradition. Traditions, especially that they do accept stage models, because many do not. Like Zen, there is no stage models. It's like in certain forms of Zen, it's like Satori is like here or not, you get it or not. But in early Theravada school, there's like, Visuddhimagga, Buddha-Hosa, is like there's very thorough stage models, So I don't have an issue with that, because within a single tradition, basically you come from one state of like alienation to the state of liberation that the Buddha experienced, or that certain scriptures tell you that is the goal. So no problem there. if you want to go in that tradition, following those stages makes sense, because are the stages that people follow before you, and they become like good signs for you to follow. But the problem is when you try to do a stage model that is universal, that is cross-cultural, and that's trans-traditional, that is prey with difficulties from all levels, not only spiritual, but also mental and conceptual as well, because different traditions value different goals. There is no just one single point for all traditions. There is, I see more the image of a tree branching out in different, diverse, creative, spiritual directions. There are different goals. There is a lot of overlap in the middle, like the branches of different trees, you know, but there is not just one peak of one mountain. There is like many peaks of many mountains. The goals are very different, and some of them there is overlapping, but to conflate all those goals into one single paradigmatic scale is very problematic, you know. I'll just say one more thing. You know, think about it, like with what one tradition considered to be like the maximum goal, like pure consciousness. For example, some traditions say pure consciousness, you know, is the goal of the spiritual growth, you know. Most Christian mystics could disagree. In fact, many Christian mystics critique that view within the Christian tradition, saying that that pure consciousness should not be acquainted with God, that it was like an experience of the soul, and that's like a state for a relational ultimate state of that it was a relationship with the divine, and was never like kind of like a complete like non-duality with it, you know. So
so how do you define integral then? So when you assign it like participatory integral or integral bodhisattva vow, how do you see integral when you assign it to your work?
Yes, I would say like integral in the different vectors, you know. I think one vector is more like intrapersonal. So an integral is spirituality, is a spirituality that embraces all of who you are, you know, not only like heart chakra spirituality, as many historical traditions did, cultivating states of equanimity and compassion in the heart, subtle dimensions of the heart, subtle dimensions of consciousness, but in a spirituality that embraces the body and instincts and sexuality, and also all of the full range of human experience. That's on the one hand, and that embrace that in a way that is co-created, that we don't value more consciousness over instinct. We don't value more the luminous logo over the dark uterus, because in the dark uterus within is where all the generative spiritual power exists. Is where all the power of the creative power of life, or the mystery, as I call it, or reality, comes there, you know, and kind of transforms through us into emotions. Chakra, heart chakra transforms to us into consciousness, and so forth. So that kind of more vertically, and then kind of like more horizontal and integral spirituality would be a spirituality that embraces also all arenas of life, not only spirituality that is in the safu or we do practice yoga, but the spirituality that is engaged in the way we write, for example, our books, you know, like trying to be respectful, treating our audience, treating our readership as in an I Dao, like as equals, you know, or also, you know, being a father, or going shopping, or everything in that regard as well. And finally also, and this is something that it should be modulated by the unique path of a spiritual individuation of each person. But now we have the fortune of something that, you know, historically was not possible. We have the fortune to be able to access spiritual teachings and practices from so many traditions, right? So it's very clear for me that traditions cannot be put higher and lower as wholes. But it's very clear also that some traditions do much better than others in different regards. Some traditions are much better than others as contemplative practice. Other traditions are better than others in kind of like social engagement. Other traditions are better than others in relationship with nature, and so forth. So therefore, like to be able also to implement many of these practices from different traditions in your life, according to the organic unfolding of your own spiritual individuation, that's another way to move towards a more integral spirituality.
I see. And I think you may have already answered this, but I wanted to just explicitly say, because when I was reading it, you talked about the ocean of emancipation with different shores. And I was thinking of that with kind of related to the perennial philosophy. Can the ocean of emancipation be sort of those spiritual ultimates And can sort of the different shores be the cultural factors?
I understand the question. Like, that metaphor is the metaphor I use only in my first book. I stopped using it. I stopped using it precisely because of that potential confusion. Even though in this book, I got out of my way to make the point that that ocean of emancipation should not be confused with an spiritual ultimate, but is simply a more pragmatic goal. It's about liberation from self-centeredness, from narcissism and selfishness. So it's like a practical goal. It's like an emancipatory potential. I would say that most contemplative traditions, like, they do have that goal in some way or other. If some of them are better than others, that's something, it's an empirical question to be researched. But what is clear to me is that if you read Buddhism and Christianity, and there are many books and teachers that would speak something about, like, freeing oneself from ego and selfishness and self-centeredness and narcissism. I was talking about that, but then I was making the very strong case that that ocean of emancipation could be reached from different shores.
Right.
So therefore, it's not about, like, just one path for all you humankind, step by step until you reach that goal, but also that some people can reach that goal through a personal relationship with God, other people through non-dual consciousness, other people to service, like to the community in shamanic practice, other people maybe also through being a good father or a good mother, like fully devoted to their kids, and so forth.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you for answering that. I just wanted to ask. So I am friends with Paul Smith and especially Luke Healy, and I was wondering if you're familiar with integral Christianity. The way I was introduced to your work was through Luke, and he talked about in their practice, they do whole body mysticism. And I was just wondering if you were curious that was going on, or if you were aware that was going on.
I've heard of integral Christianity. I confess I haven't read the literature, the books. I don't know them. I do know that there are many kind of contemporary trends within Christianity, not only integral, moving towards kind of like an embodied prayer and dance and prayer. I mean, I think it's like the trend towards embodiment. I think it's like something like trans-traditional. You have that in Buddhism with embodied Buddhism. It's kind of everywhere, like look at yoga practice, right? Yoga practice, the original goal was pretty disembodied, was to become identified with the Purusha, the witness of everything, mental and physical states, had to fully disidentify yourselves from the body. Today, yoga practice is completely like cultivated in a fully embodied ways. So it does not surprise me that in Christianity also there is this movement, and I celebrate. I mean, I don't know what whole body mysticism, how they do it, but sounds really great and sounds very aligned with my perspective.
Wonderful. And so that does bring me to sort of your book. And I was, so sort of surprising this next sort of spiritual chapter. And while you do talk about in Participation in Mystery, the importance of sexual energy, sexuality, sexual energy, and that connecting to the creative process. So love and freedom is transcending monogamy and polyamory. And I was wondering if you could kind of talk to our listeners a little bit, what motivated you to write this book?
Yes, well,
it's a wonderful book too.
Thank you, appreciate it. Well, the book is based on my own personal trajectory in terms of intimate relationships. When I had my first girlfriend in Barcelona, I don't know what year was that. I was very much in love with her, and she was very much in love with me. We're walking through the streets of Barcelona, and then I realized, wow, this means because I love very much this wonderful woman that I cannot love any other of the 7.9 million people that exist in the planet today in a sensuous or physical or sexual ways. It struck me as a delirium of cosmic proportions. It's like, why is that so? Why we limit our love so much, And so that started like a several decades journey, like exploring different forms of relationship. I explore forms of polyamory or open relationships, but also after many years of polyamory, I realized that, wow, I really feel drawn to experience what monogamy holds for me. So I had like several long-term monogamous relationships, Also in the middle of all this, I had 3 years of celibacy. So my trajectory has been like really kind of, and then at some point I realized, on the one hand, I realized two things. One is that people who are in the monogamous and the polyamorous camp, they would kind of condescendingly judge each other, look each other as inferior, critique each other. That's what I call the monopoly wars. It's in the literature, it's in everyday life, and I feel like, why is that so, right? And then the second thing I realized, well, I feel now I can live both open relationships and monogamy without serious fears of conflicts. And then I realized, well, I feel like that gives me some kind of some freedom to choose that kind of relational style that is more aligned with my own developmental unfolding, but also with the ecology of every situation, what is truth to the people I love. And that felt like a freedom, felt like an important freedom. I call relational freedom. And then I started to realize, we need to map out more all this territory that lies beyond the dichotomy, monogamy and polyamory. I normally make this analogy because most readers or more people in my audiences really get this point. It's like a transgender movement with gender. Not long ago, you were either a man or a woman. No one would think there could be alternatives. It's one or thing or the other. The transgender community has taught us that there is a huge spectrum of possibilities in between and beyond. So in a way, although I didn't feel inspired directly by this movement, I think the analogy is very valid. So what I've been doing in this book is to map out the territory that lies beyond the monogamy and polyamory dichotomy. I could explain a bit more what is this about, or I don't know if you prefer me to go in a different direction.
No, if you want to continue, yeah, that would be great.
Wonderful. I'll just give some examples. I talk about these different ways to move beyond this binary or this dichotomy, and one way is kind of what I call fluidity. It's the idea that if we're monogamous or polyamorous, it's not something essential to ourselves. It can change over time. For example, like in my case, maybe at some points in our development, we really feel drawn to be monogamous. Many other times we'll feel drawn to be poly, and there is no universal sequence here. Sometimes go from mono to poly, from poly to mono, and so forth.
Yeah.
So and also context. When we travel in the world, sometimes we're in different cultures and we feel different. Maybe I've experienced that. I've been in some places that I felt like having monogamous relationships, and then I go somewhere else and I feel more open to something else. And of course, many people experience this, for example, with festivals. I know many people who are very monogamous, but then they go to Burning Man festival, and for that week they are very poly.
Yeah.
So are you monogamous or are you polyamorous? Well, it depends on context, depends on your developmental model, no? And to add to that, in addition to fluidity, it's also more hybridity, the way in which those values can coexist within each person, no? One example of this is to look at that kind of diversity I was referring before when we're talking about being integral. You are not a monolithic entity. Maybe many people are monogamous at heart, but sexually they want sexual diversity. They are poly. Or I know some people that they really get polyamory intellectually, and actually they believe in it and they would want to be, but they have sex with someone and they just don't want to be with anyone else. And all that should be respected. But the question, is this person monogamous or polyamorous? Well, depending on what center you ask.
Yeah.
I can go on and on with different examples that you have read in the book, but I think this illustrates a little how we can really break down that dichotomy.
Yeah, and you talked about also fluidity, hybridity, and then also transcendence, right? So transcending is, can you finish on that one?
Thank you. Transcendence would be the third mode. Each of the modes have different pathways, and it's all mapped up in the book. Transcendence is like when we don't identify with any of those categories, because you see in fluidity and in hybridity, the categories remain. Simply you move from one to the other, or you realize you contain both, for example. But in transcendence, basically is when you realize, well, it's like the transgender. Some transgender people, they realize, I'm not a man, not a woman, I'm something different. I'm transgender. So I've coined the term nobogamy, but I don't care about the term. I get out of the way in the book to say that people can coin their own term. But the idea is that people can coin a term or use something like that. That is like it's like describes a new identity that is
Yes.
trans-binary, that is kind of
Mhm.
goes beyond that binary dichotomy. But many people also don't feel identified, or they are bothered by labels, you know. They can say, well, another label is another relational canon, something that can be put over the others, another hierarchy. And it's like, great, well, don't use in a label. So that's what I call the anarchic path to monogamy, you know, or to trans-binary relationship, you know. So it's basically people who don't need any label, you know. Why do we need to label so much, right? Everything we are, you know. For some people it could be important because they make them feel, okay, I belong to this community of people, that there's this identity, or it's like, okay, I know who I am now, you know, because it could be very, you know, cause of the confusion, you know. But for other people, they feel comfortable with no labels, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And the last path in Transcendence is like more, this is more transpersonal in a way. This also connects with the spirituality, is the cultivation of these kind of non-dual forms of cognition, you know, going beyond the logical mind that is based on binary thinking, you know, either or. And in many traditions, you know, there is practices and there is this kind of overall approach to life that cultivates this kind of non-dual consciousness and going beyond those kind of like mental categories, right? So I call it the Zen path. It's like koan, you know, it's like, in this way, like your identity is a paradox. It's not something you need to put a label or not. It's something that you live, you know, it's kind of like this, an existential koan.
So I do have, I mean, talking about my own past, and I grew up also Catholic, went to a Catholic school, very aware at an early age. I wanted to be a priest, but I knew I wanted to have kids, and that was just not going to be part. I knew at that early age, it's just like, it wasn't going to happen. But I'm still drawn to sort of the Catholic Church in the sense of, you know, priests aren't allowed to marry. And I definitely see the key to sort of how sexuality is still repressed. And I was just hoping maybe you can have, what is your opinion on and obviously this is a very long answer, but a short answer of how the Catholic Church can transform itself in the 21st century, in your opinion?
Great. Well, I would say that there are so many so many ways in which it can transform, obviously. But I would say in along the lines of the conversation we're having here about integral development, and also I would say like two major things is the role of women, of course, is break the Catholic Christian tradition from patriarchal thinking, for patriarchal habits, like why men and not women are considered the mediators of the divine. I mean, in the 21st century, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, right? So this is like a major one, right? And the second one is sexuality. That's very clear. That dilemma that you experience, it's a beautiful dilemma, and it's a dilemma that I was pushing in that direction. In a way, underneath the dilemma is the question like, why cannot be both? Why cannot be a fully devoted to God and be a priest and have children? Of course, many other denominations within the Christian traditions don't have this problem. But in the Catholic Christian tradition, still that's like an issue. And that's very important because I think it really helped, of course, with one of the greatest tragedies of the Christian tradition, Catholic in particular today, that is all the sexual scandals that are taking place. You know, in a way, like especially our sexual scandals that are directed towards children. And I think there is a logic to it. Because, you know, in a way, a child embodies a pure essence of sensuality and sexuality as an adult that don't. So many of these men, of course, they have a lot of repression, repressing that energy so much that there is a distortion. They are feeling drawn. They know that the way to heal is to connect with the pure, essential sexual energy, but because they cannot even consider to do it within themselves, they project it outwards. And then they go, I think, unconsciously in search of healing in a compulsive, addictive way. But if we could help many of these priests understand that they are not necessarily damaged perverts, you know, people who need healing and need to connect with the essential, pure fountain of clean water that is sexuality, that is underneath of those layers of repression within themselves. I assure you, they would lose the addiction and compulsion to abuse children.
Absolutely.
So this is huge.
Yeah. And totally on a tangent, but somewhat connected to sort of the idea of the Eucharist and sort of a divine agent coming through. I did want to maybe end this with, I'm so curious when I read about when you talked about in 1998 going to Peru and drinking ayahuasca every day, and you talked about astral doctors and Harry Potter meets the Matrix. And to me, it's just like you're my own personal Indiana Jones and sort of these explorations. And I was hoping you could talk just a little bit about that experience and what it was like.
Well,
is it even safe to do every other day?
What's that?
Is it even safe to do every other day? Ayahuasca. Is it safe to do every?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is safe. It is safe.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't do it every single day of or every other day during a year, although there is some people going into shamanic trainings that sometimes they do. Many shamans in Peru in the jungle, they are doing ayahuasca several times a week for many years, and they look pretty healthy to me. So I think it's kind of pretty innocuous. The only thing I would say is like from my conversations with shamans and people who have doing a lot of ayahuasca, because it plays with the serotonin system in the brain, many of them have sleep problems. So it can affect your sleep, basically. Like, hey, we'll get affected by sleep by stress and watching too much TV and looking too much in the computers. Yeah. Well, maybe doing ayahuasca is not the worst way to get your sleep affected.
Yeah.
Especially if it's giving you to many other things, right? So what I would say about those, yes. What?
It's becoming more and more popular.
Yes, well, there's a globalization of ayahuasca. Why? Because it's giving people in very short time access to very deep, sacred, spiritual experiences, I mean, you can spend like a whole life meditating and you may get here, or it depends, sometimes are very kind of naturally like, have gifted in meditation, but for most people, it's going to be years and years until they get to some place. And with ayahuasca, you can access, with most psychedelics and entheogens, you can access like different states. That's a good thing on the one hand. On the other hand, there is the challenge of integration, as we all know. And that's like, because people have these amazing experiences, people also can get hooked up to have these experiences in kind of like in a periodic way. And then don't do the transformative work. So that's something that we see a lot in that culture as well.
Yeah.
But coming back to your original questions, like what I would say is like, for me, those experiences, the experiences that you were referring to, I'll say just for the audience, there were experiences in which they were like shared visions with your eyes opening, with not only me, but other people were seeing the same subtle phenomena in the external world. Either astral doctors that came inside the ceremonial hut, healing people, putting their hands in their heart chakra, lower chakra, or also other kind of spiritual entities with San Pedro, different forms of light, auras, like many things. I've seen some of these things before, but what struck me about those experiences was their shareable nature. Several people and myself were seeing the same things. In the case of San Pedro, it went for almost 2 hours. We were playing with different fields of energy. It was pretty remarkable. And for me, that was very important because in a way, like, Oliver Sacks' definition of hallucination is like something that you see and other people don't see. But when something that you see, one person sees and other people don't see, that's a definition of hallucination, right?
Yeah.
But when you and other people are seeing the same thing in the external world, it's much harder for the scientific establishment to say, well, that's an hallucination. I've done a lot of research on collective hallucinations and of different types. I haven't found any model today that would explain those 2 hours of seeing people interacting with different fields of energy. I feel them physically as well. At some point, I was kind of on my knees crying because this kind of energies, blue and green, had entered my body. I was feeling healed in beautiful ways. And then suddenly I felt in my armpits, like some people trying to push me up. And I thought it was Victoria, the healer, and another participant. And then I see them in front of me and I say, what the fuck? And I look right and left and I see like those 2 indigenous spirits, entities pushing me, and I felt them first in my armpits. So
Yeah.
how do you make what do you make of these things? And of course, the transformative effect. The astral doctors, they not only touch you, but they do like kind of like energetic surgery in your heart chakra and your center, and you could feel the adjustments they're making, and you feel different afterwards, you know. So I was very taken by these experiences, and also they helped me to understand that that many of these entities, they have a very autonomous nature, because in my earlier model, I would tend to believe that all these worlds were co-created, right? And I still feel there is co-creation all the way around, because we live in an interrelated, radical interrelated universe. So that's co-creation. But it really taught me that to be more humble, and it's like, wow, there is so many things we don't know, you know. This universe, this life, this cosmos could be completely multidimensional. There are many subtle dimensions of reality. They could have their own inhabitants with autonomy of consciousness and agency. And to believe that all of them are created is another sign of anthropocentric hubris. So it was very humbling for me, and therefore very important.
Wow. I mean, that is just amazing. I want to thank you so much for being on the show, and your work. It has meant so much to me. You've helped me introduce me to guests that I've had on the show to record. And I just want to thank you so much. Your work has meant so much to me, and I'm sure to future generations. And it's been an honor to have you.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you, Jorge.
Thank you so much.